She grabbed my arm in the parking lot, eyes wide, and said 5 words that made my stomach drop. And when I finally figured out what my husband had actually planned, I didn't cry. I got even. I'm a 34-year-old woman, middle school art teacher, married 8 years to a man who could sell sunscreen in Seattle. Charming, well-dressed, always the loudest laugh in the room. We lived in a nice suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where people wave from driveways and bring casseroles when you have surgery. Our neighbor had lived next door for 6 years. Quiet woman, kept to herself mostly, but she and I had developed the kind of friendship built on borrowed eggs and front porch wine nights. I trusted her instincts more than I trusted most people's words. Our anniversary was in March. 8 years. My husband had been unusually attentive leading up to it. Flowers twice in 1 week, cooking dinner on a Tuesday, asking about my schedule more than normal. I told my coworker about it and she said, "Girl, either he feels guilty or he's about to ask for something expensive." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. The night of our anniversary, he took me to the nicest restaurant downtown. Candlelight, live piano, the whole thing. Halfway through dessert, he slid an envelope across the table with a ribbon on it. "Open it," he said, grinning like he'd just solved world hunger. Inside was a printed cruise itinerary. 7 days. Caribbean. Departing in 6 weeks. Solo. Just my name on the ticket. I looked up at him. "You're not coming?" "I've got that conference in Denver that week, remember? But you deserve a real vacation. Go relax. Bring a book." Something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. But the gesture was generous, and I didn't want to ruin the night. I folded the paper back into the envelope and said, "Thank you, because what else do you say?" The next morning, I was loading groceries from my car when my neighbor walked over. She had a look on her face I hadn't seen before, urgent, almost pained. "Hey," she said quietly, glancing toward my house. "Can I ask you something weird?" "Sure." "Are you going somewhere soon? Like a trip?" I frowned. "How did you know that?" She exhaled slowly. "I need to tell you something, but I need you to stay calm." She told me that 3 days earlier, she'd seen a woman she didn't recognize park down the street, walk up to my front door, and my husband had let her in. They were inside for 2 hours. She'd seen it twice before, once in January, once in February, but she hadn't been sure enough to say anything. This time, she'd taken a photo of the woman's car. License plate and everything. "I wasn't going to say anything until you mentioned a cruise," she said. "That felt like he was trying to get you out of the house." I stood there in my driveway holding a bag of oranges like a complete idiot. "Send me the photo," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. That night, I didn't confront him. I smiled through dinner, watched TV on the couch next to him, let him kiss me goodnight. And after he fell asleep, I sat in the kitchen with my phone and ran that license plate through every public record tool I could find. Within an hour, I had a full name, an address, and a LinkedIn profile showing she worked at his company. Same department. Had for 2 years. 2 years. I called my brother the next morning from my car, parked outside the school before first period. "I think he's been cheating on me for 2 years," I said. "And I think he bought me a cruise ticket to get me out of the house so he could play house with someone else for a week." My brother was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need?" "A lawyer. And your poker face at Easter dinner." He gave me both. The attorney I met with that Friday was sharp, thorough, and did not sugarcoat a single thing. "Ohio is an equitable distribution state," she explained, "meaning marital assets get divided fairly, not necessarily equally. Given our 8 years of marriage, my lower income as a teacher, and the documented evidence of a long-term affair, I was in a solid position." She advised me clearly, "Do not tip him off, do not leave the home, do not make large purchases, and start gathering financial documents quietly." "Do you have access to your joint accounts?" she asked. Full access, I said. Good. Document everything. Don't move money yet. Just know what's there. I went home that evening and made a pasta dinner. Set the table. Asked my husband about his day. Same old, he said, pouring himself a glass of wine. You excited about the cruise? More and more every day, I told him. He smiled and clinked his glass against mine. What he didn't know was that I had already contacted a forensic accountant my attorney recommended, because in the past 2 weeks of quietly reviewing our finances, I'd found 3 recurring transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Small amounts. $300 here, $250 there. But consistent. Going back 14 months. He wasn't just cheating with his time. He was spending our money doing it. The forensic accountant confirmed it within 10 days. Over 14 months, my husband had transferred just under $9,000 in small increments to a secondary account I had no access to. The accountant documented every transaction with timestamps, amounts, and a paper trail that was, in her words, almost insultingly easy to follow. He wasn't careful, she said during our follow-up call. No, I agreed. He assumed I wouldn't look. That assumption was going to cost him everything. My attorney filed the divorce petition on a Thursday morning. My husband was served at his office, which I'll admit I specifically requested, partly for logistics and partly because he'd embarrassed me in my own home for 2 years and I wasn't feeling generous about his comfort. I was told by his assistant later, who turned out to have zero loyalty to him, that he went completely pale and had to step out of a meeting. He called me 11 times between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. I answered on the 12th. What is this? He said, voice tight. It's a divorce petition, I said. Your attorney can explain the rest. You can't be serious. We can talk about this. I'm at work, I said. Don't call this number again unless it's through your lawyer. And I hung up. He showed up at the house that evening. I had already changed the locks, which I was fully within my rights to do since my name was on the mortgage, and he stood on the front porch looking stunned, like a man who had never once considered that his choices might have consequences. He knocked for a solid 4 minutes. I watched through the window, then texted him, Your clothes are in boxes in the garage. Code to the side door is still the same. Take what's yours and leave the key. That was dirty trick number 1 from his side, showing up unannounced to try to pressure me into a conversation before I had legal protection fully in place. My attorney had warned me this might happen. I was prepared. Dirty trick number 2 came 3 days later. He called my school. He spoke to the front office, said he was concerned about a family emergency, and asked them to have me step out of class. The office manager, bless her, called me on the classroom phone first. There's a man on the line saying it's a family emergency, she said. Do you know, and she gave his name. That's my soon-to-be ex-husband, I said. Please tell him this line is for school business only, and if he calls again, we'll document it. I heard her repeat it to him almost word for word, and I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from laughing. He tried to rattle me. He tried to make me feel exposed, isolated, like I'd overreacted. He sent a long text through a mutual friend, because he knew I'd blocked him, describing our marriage as struggling but salvageable, and asking if we could try counseling before making any permanent decisions. Counseling. After 2 years and $9,000. The mutual friend texted me, clearly uncomfortable. He asked me to pass this along. I told him I thought it was a bad idea. Just so you know. I replied, You're a good person. Don't let him do that again. His third dirty trick was the most calculated. 2 weeks after being served, his attorney sent over a counterfiling that claimed I had been emotionally withdrawn and financially irresponsible during the marriage, and submitted a list of personal expenses I'd made over the past year as evidence. Spa days, a weekend trip with my sister, some art supplies for a personal project. He was trying to reframe me as the problem spouse to muddy the equitable distribution argument. My attorney read through it, set it down, and looked at me. He's comparing your spa days to his hidden $9,000 account? Apparently, I said. Okay, she said, in the tone of someone who had been waiting for a fight worth having. Let's go. We counterfiled with the full forensic accounting report, the documented transfers, the timeline of the affair corroborated by my neighbor's photos and her signed statement, and a formal request for dissipation of marital assets, which, under Ohio law, means when one spouse uses shared money to fund an affair, the other spouse can be compensated for that amount in the final settlement. $9,000, plus the cost of the cruise ticket he'd bought with a joint credit card, plus 2 years of dinners, hotels, and whatever else he'd paid for that we hadn't fully traced yet. My attorney was methodical. She was also, I noticed, quietly delighted. The mediation was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, my husband apparently told his girlfriend that the divorce was basically a misunderstanding and that we'd probably reconcile. I know this because his assistant, the one with zero loyalty to him, passed along what the woman had told a coworker who then told her. Small offices are remarkable ecosystems. My brother came to stay with me for a week during the worst of it. We sat on the back porch one night, and he said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "He bought you a cruise ticket to get rid of you for a week. And instead, he got rid of himself permanently." He shook his head. "Worst return on investment I've ever seen." I actually laughed. The first real one in weeks. Mediation was set for a Tuesday in May at a neutral attorney's office downtown. I wore a blazer and flat shoes and arrived 10 minutes early. My husband arrived with his attorney and a look on his face that I recognized, the one he wore when he was about to try to charm his way through something. He glanced at me across the conference table and said, "You look good." My attorney put her hand lightly on my forearm. Not a restraint, a signal. Don't engage. I didn't. The session lasted 4 hours. His side opened by arguing that the hidden account was a personal savings effort and not a dissipation of assets. The forensic accountant's report, already submitted to the mediator, cataloged 14 months of transfers that corresponded almost perfectly with the timeline of the affair. His attorney pivoted quickly, they always do when the paper trail is clean, and moved to arguing that the total amount was not significant enough to alter the settlement substantially. Our mediator, a retired family court judge, looked at his attorney over her glasses and said, "Counsel, $9,000 is $9,000. His attorney moved on. By hour 3, it was clear his position had no traction. The dissipation claim stood. The equitable distribution calculation factored in my lower earning potential as a teacher compared to his corporate salary, the duration of the marriage, and the documented misconduct. The cruise ticket, purchased on our joint Visa card for $2,400, was also added to the dissipation total. He contested it. It was a gift, he said. To the room. Out loud. The mediator looked at him. A gift purchased with marital funds during an ongoing extramarital relationship, intended to vacate your spouse from the home. That's not a gift, sir. That's logistics. I kept my face completely neutral. Internally, I was a different story. Final settlement terms were reached that afternoon, pending court approval which came 6 weeks later under Ohio's standard uncontested divorce timeline. I received the house. My name had always been on the deed, a buyout of his equity share, my full retirement contributions, half of our joint savings, and a lump sum representing the dissipated marital assets with interest calculated from the date of first transfer. He walked out of that building with his car, his personal accounts, and a very expensive lesson. His attorney filed one last motion 2 days later, a request to revisit the asset division based on newly discovered information. It was thin. My attorney flagged it as a delay tactic, which is common in Ohio divorce proceedings, and the court agreed. The motion was denied. Timeline held. And then, the part one want to tell slowly, the part that still makes me feel something I don't have a clean word for. His girlfriend, the one he'd been spending our money on for 14 months, broke up with him 3 weeks after the settlement was finalized. I know because his assistant told me. I know it's petty to care. I cared anyway. Apparently, she had believed him when he said the divorce was a misunderstanding. When the settlement terms became clear and she understood the actual scope of what he'd done and what it had cost him, she ended things. He called her entitled. She called him a liar. His assistant said the HR department had to get involved because the argument happened near the break room. I sent his assistant a very nice gift basket. Now, the part that I actually orchestrated, because sitting back and waiting for karma felt insufficient. 6 months before all of this unraveled, my husband had asked me to co-sign a small business loan application. He had this idea about a side investment, a rental property with a friend of his. I had declined at the time because I thought the numbers were weak and I'd told him so. He'd dropped it. What I discovered during the financial review, buried in his personal email, which he'd stayed logged into on our shared home computer, because again, not careful, was that he'd gone ahead with the investment anyway using money from that hidden account. He and his friend had put a deposit on a property. $3,500 of marital money, used as a down payment on a private investment he'd made without my knowledge or consent. Under Ohio law, that's another dissipation claim. My attorney filed it as a supplemental motion. It delayed the finalization by 3 weeks, which was frustrating for both sides, but the court upheld it. He was required to reimburse that amount into the shared settlement pool as well. His friend, who had known about the affair, it turned out, and had let my husband use his address to receive mail from the girlfriend, lost the deposit entirely because the purchase fell through once my husband's funds were frozen pending the supplemental motion. So his friend lost $3,500. My husband lost the same amount in reimbursement. And the property deal collapsed. I didn't plan that part. It just fell that way. But I'm not going to pretend I felt bad about it. My neighbor came over the evening after the final court approval came through. We sat on my porch with cheap wine. The good stuff felt like it deserved a better occasion, and also I was saving money now, which was genuinely new and genuinely freeing. I almost didn't say anything, she said. I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if it ruins everything? You didn't ruin anything, I said. He did. You just made sure I knew in time. She nodded and poured more wine. We sat there while it got dark, and I thought about the moment in that restaurant when I'd unfolded the cruise itinerary and smiled at my husband and said thank you. I thought about how carefully I'd been managed. How much energy he'd spent keeping things in place while I walked through my own life completely unaware. That made me angry all over again. But it was a different kind of anger. Cleaner. Like something that had already done its work. The house still felt strange for a while. Not sad, exactly. More like rooms that were learning to be a different size. I repainted the bedroom a color I'd wanted for 3 years that he'd said looked too dark. It did not look too dark. It looked exactly right. I went back to my regular routine. Taught my classes. Had dinner with my brother. Started taking a Saturday morning ceramics class because I'd always meant to and never had a clear reason not to. Life, it turns out, fits better when it isn't also accommodating someone else's secrets. About 4 months after the settlement, I got a voicemail. Him. He'd called from a number I didn't recognize, which told me everything about the level of self-awareness involved. The message said he was sorry. That he'd made terrible choices. That he hoped I could find it in my heart to talk eventually. I listened to it twice. Then I forwarded it to my attorney, just for documentation, and deleted it. I'm not carrying that. It's not mine to carry. People ask me sometimes, now that I've talked about this more openly, whether I ever saw it coming. And the honest answer is, there were things I explained away. The extra attentiveness. The detailed interest in my schedule. The way he sometimes looked at his phone like it was going to do something he needed to intercept. I filed each of those things under marriage is complicated and moved on. I don't think I was naive. I think I trusted someone I'd built a life with, and he used that trust deliberately. Those aren't the same thing. The forensic accountant sent me a card after everything was finalized. She wrote, "You asked the right questions at the right time. Most people don't. You should feel good about that." I put it on my fridge. Still there. Here's what I know now that I didn't know before. Entitlement is loud when it's denied. Every escalation my husband made, showing up at the house, calling my school, filing that weak counterclaim, that last-ditch supplemental challenge, all of it was the behavior of someone who genuinely believed he could manage the situation back into his favor. He wasn't sorry he'd done it. He was sorry it hadn't worked. That distinction matters. It's the difference between someone who made a mistake and someone who made a plan. My neighbor texted me last week. She said a new family had moved in 2 streets over, and the husband seemed weirdly interested in whether the wives on the block worked during the day. I texted back, "Tell them to check the shared computer." She sent back 3 laughing emojis, and then, "You really did become a different person through all of this." I thought about that for a while. I don't think I became different. I think I stopped being manageable. There's a gap between those two things, and I lived in it for 8 years without knowing. I'm 34. The ceramics are getting better. The bedroom is the right color. And I have not, for the record, taken a cruise, but when I do, it'll be because I want to, and I'll book it myself. If this story made you feel something, hit subscribe, because apparently I'm not done finding out what else I didn't know, and you might as well be here when I do.